The one thing that we're really focused in on is, first of all, if you look at the outcomes that we work on each 90 days, they all have a customer orientation of different aspects that we're trying to help more patients get on therapy. What does that look like? And what are the initiatives behind it we're trying to do that? So that's very much like making the lives of physicians who are trying to get patients onto therapy easier. And how do we go about doing this? There's clearly an aspect of measuring it and then taking a look at it.
Welcome to the Leading Minds podcast, where we delve deep inside the minds of the top life sciences executives. Join us as we unravel how they think, their vision for the industry, the purpose that drives them, and how they are moving the industry forward while fueling growth for their companies and their teams.
This is Leading Minds, and I'm your host, Jasmeet Sawhney. In every episode, we meet a leader who has made a lasting impact in the life sciences industry and continues to drive the industry forward. We go beyond the name and the title to unravel their personality, their beliefs, and most importantly, to understand how their brilliant minds are changing the world for the better. Before we get started, I want to thank our exclusive sponsor, Axtria, a leading global provider of cloud software and data analytics solutions to the life sciences industry. Now, on to today's episode. I'm really excited about conversation that we're going to have today because of multiple reasons. One, we have two of the most distinguished leaders in the industry, so my opportunity to learn here is immense, which, by the way, is the key reason I do this podcast, to learn from the leaders. Two, I usually talk to leaders across the globe. I think we've been talking about that. Mostly the conversations are virtual. So today is the opportunity that I have to sit in the studio next to you guys, which brings a new dynamic to the conversation. And three, we're talking about an extremely important topic, customer engagement, which can really make or break the success of any company. So that's really exciting. And I think our audience is going to learn a lot from that. Now, let me introduce my guests. It's an honor to welcome Paul Bedard and Jassi Chadha. They are leaders of such high stature that you guys don't really need an introduction. But just for the new listeners, I would provide a quick background. Paul is the Senior Vice President of Customer Engagement at Bayer US. He has had an illustrious career spanning sales, marketing, and business development, and has worked across multiple therapeutic areas: cardiovascular, women's health, neurology, and hematology. What I find powerful in Paul's work is that he is a true embodiment of Bayer's mission, science for a better life. And this is further strengthened by his position or passion, I would say, to improve patient access to innovative treatments. So thank you, Paul, for joining.
Thanks, Jasmeet. Good to be here.
Absolutely. And as for Jassi, he's an entrepreneur, a highly regarded data scientist, and an influential thought leader in the life sciences industry. He currently serves as the president and CEO of Axtria, which is one of the life sciences industry's most prominent global brands, serving customers in 130 countries. Previously, Jassi was the co-founder and CEO of MarketRx, which was acquired by Cognizant Technology Solutions. Some of the most aspirational lists have featured Jassi and his companies. The awards he has received are just too many to list in a podcast intro, so I'll skip those for today. So thank you, guys. Thank you, Jassi, for joining us today.
Thanks, Jasmeet. Good to be here, and especially being here with Paul. It's an honor.
Absolutely, it's an honor. So I'll dig right into it. Paul, let me start by asking you about Bayer's bold ambition to kind of reinvent its organizational design by shifting towards DSO, or the dynamic shared ownership. What are some core principles, and what does this mean, like in the day-to-day basis for your customer engagement teams?
Yeah, thanks, Jasmeet. Well, it's a major undertaking, but it's an exciting undertaking. It's been in the US, we're 9 months into the implementation of dynamic shared ownership. And I think actually, or DSO, I think the name sort of captures the principles there. The dynamic part of it, there's an element of how we work, and then there's an element of how we're structured. How we work is really captured in the dynamic shared ownership. There's an element there of focusing very much, in the tech industry uses this agile approach, but 90-day cycles, focused collectively. So that the shared part of it is all parts of the organization really focusing in on and having input on what are we trying to accomplish. We call them outcomes over that 90-day period. And from an ownership, giving a lot of autonomy to individuals to decide what needs to happen in their particular area to achieve that outcome. And so that's essentially the concept. It sounds very basic. Putting it into place in an organization where you've had a lot of hierarchy, decisions made centrally is a big undertaking. And so one of the things that we've done from a structure perspective is we've really changed the way that we're organizing the structure. As we embarked on this, we actually really delayered the organization. We removed 40% of our management positions. We created teams that were cross-functional in nature, so customer engagement, which is primarily our sales organization, but everything that's customer-facing. You could have nurse educators, field reimbursement managers, and rather than to reporting into separate structures within the organization, they all report into a team leader that we call an area general manager. And that team leader really works with those teams to set those priorities within the team of what they're going to focus in on those every 90 days so that all parts of the organization are really trying to address the primary needs of the customer. Those are the two things that we're going forward. What we're starting to see is in some areas of the organization, one part of our business in women's healthcare is a very contracted business. Our ability to actually respond to contract requests, defend business has really increased, and we've had a number of very important wins within that part of it. So we're starting to see some early wins as a result of it. And I would say that the enthusiasm in the organization for the changes are really good, but there's still lots of work to be done.
Amazing. And Paul, you talked about the autonomy, the ownership, and accountability, which are really important. So Jassi, I want to ask, because you have seen these principles, you have implemented these principles and operating models in many of the organizations that you have built. What are your thoughts on these core principles and how they kind of really help in the organization and operational excellence?
So basically, when you look at just the core principles of agility, shared responsibility, and making decisions not centrally, but actually not in the rest of the organization, I think in some ways, I would say that that's what a lot of entrepreneurial companies do. As an entrepreneurial company, we have to go, in a way, live these principles because, you have to be flexible because we do so many different things. We try different things and a lot of these things fail. But at the same time, also, we don't have long runways. So outcomes really becomes very, very important. So having the shared responsibility, becoming outcomes driven and so on. So I put the structure of, what Paul talked about DSO, but the principles itself, I think, is something which are very essential and in some ways common sense, but it's actually amazing. You see that in large companies, they begin to kind of fade away in the background. Everyone knows what needs to get done, but it's refreshing to see that there is so much focus in such a large global organization like Bayer to, do these things. You expect that from smaller entrepreneurial companies.
Yeah, and it's incredible that a company of their size and complexity has taken on this journey. And you're right. I mean, many of the principles are foundational and are key to the operational excellence of any company. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the focus on customers. And Paul, in the new operating models, serving the customer is at the heart of everything. So what are some of the areas or themes you're focusing on to elevate customer engagement and make it more personalized?
Yeah, so I think I touched on this before. I mean, the one thing that we're really focused in on is, first of all, if you look at the outcomes that we work on each 90 days, they all have a customer orientation of different aspects that we're trying to improve in terms of helping more patients. You spoke about this a second ago, Jazz. Help more patients get on therapy. What does that look like? And what are the initiatives behind that we're trying to do that? So that's very much like making the lives of physicians who are trying to get patients onto therapy easier. And how do we go about doing this? There's clearly an aspect of measuring it and then taking a look at it. So that's from a customer perspective. We've got everything from an outcomes side of it is very focused. But at the end of each 90 days, we kind of gauge, how are we doing on this? Like, are we bringing more value? Have we actually done a better job? We actually had a session yesterday. We were together for a half a day of where those things that we need to make some refinements on. And it's you never solve it in a 90-day period, but you hope that you've made progress. And if you haven't made progress, what do we need to do and adjust? And I think one of the things that we're really trying to do is, from a customer engagement perspective, it's not just that it's the product team or the brand team that's thinking about it, or the market access team, but what is the feedback that's coming in from those that are interacting with customers day to day that we need to do differently, and how does that refine our plan? So that really is at the core of what we're trying to do, is make sure that we've got outcomes that are focused in on customer needs, and then we're constantly assessing whether or not we're making progress and improving.
I really like those focus areas because it seems like an optimal mix of not only kind of driving customer engagement, but also ensuring access to patients. And you talked about outcomes. Now, Jassi, your work has helped life sciences companies drive customer engagement for decades. I want to understand, what roles do digital technologies and data analytics play in reshaping customer engagement and experience?
So, Jasmeet, it is all about actually understanding your customer, putting the customer in the center of all your decision making, knowing everything about your customer, and at the customer segment of one, which has always been the holy grail, not only in the life sciences pharma industry, but in every industry. And we have seen this thing across the board that the companies who've actually achieved this have actually, their performance has been far superior to the companies who have not done that. And in the day and age that we all live in, where there is so much customer data available, if you want to basically get to know customers, your ability to actually synthesize that data becomes kind of foundational. It's a necessary but not a sufficient condition, by the way, because just having the data itself is not enough. How do you actually get insights from that? How do you actually connect it with the actions you need to take, and that actually drives your outcomes that Paul was talking about? And that essentially, that whole value chain is basically starts with getting to know your customers. And in life sciences industry, fortunately or unfortunately, who the customer is also very different than what we typically see in any other industry. Because in any industry, a customer is someone who decides to buy a product, pays for it, and consumes it. In our industry, there are multiple entities who actually make these decisions. So who is a customer? Is the customer the PCP or the healthcare professional who decided to prescribe your product? Is it actually the insurance company who decides to pay for it? Or it is a patient who can decide whether they want to consume it or not and actually, get the outcome they want? Linking and understanding the data among all those three entities and putting it all together is not for the faint of heart. And actually, I would argue that there's still a lot of unfinished business in the data foundational aspect of it before you start getting into understanding and generating insights from it. Last thing I will actually point out is that you cannot have a podcast these days without talking about AI and Gen AI, right? I think the biggest opportunity there is that when we have historically thought about data and generating insights, we have talked about structured data. And what the AI and Gen AI is not enabling us to do is to basically analyze structured data along with unstructured data. So it's a big step up and really truly understanding who the customers are, how we're engaging with the customer. Again, this is still foundational, but the level of insights and analytics that you need to build on top of that, there is still a lot of work that needs to be done in our industry.
And maybe I can just build on Jesse's insight, because I think when you talk about customer and the trifecta that you discussed of the patient, the payer, and the physician, those insights and aligning the insights across all three is what is really becomes very challenging and critical. And you realize that if the payer has a certain perspective on your product and sees its value and utility to a certain type of patient or subset that maybe is more narrower than what your label is or your clinical trials, is how do you align that? Either one, how do you demonstrate there's a broader value that can be brought to a broader set of patients, but also how does that align then with how the physicians use it, the types of patients, and the targeting and the focus that you have? And that, I think, is really important, because there's not just a single customer, and you need alignment. If you're out of sync with who you're focused in on with the payers versus who you are focused in on with physicians and the patient types that they see, then you aren't bringing value to all three, right? But there's a lack of synchronicity upon it. And I think that's really takes a lot of work on the insight side to make sure that you've got that alignment.
At the end of it also, there is so many new data sources becoming available. In US, we are very fortunate to have amazing quality and volume of patient data, for example. And because, this is a journey that started 15, 20 years ago in terms of the whole digitalization of the whole healthcare ecosystem. And the exhaust of every system is basically data. And our ability to really understand, especially the patient side of the business, and understanding that actually has become really, really critical. The other aspect is the whole, and this is part of the whole real world data that is available. And going back to the same values of actually driving outcomes, shared responsibility, and so on, patient N of one, you will actually need to make better decisions, faster decisions with the real world data at the patient level. And that is essentially driven by that data and insights generated with analytics.
That makes a lot of sense. Paul, I do want to dig into what Jassi said a little bit deeper on the AI side of it. Mm-hmm. How do you think machine learning and AI would help transform customer engagement? Do you have any perspective on that?
Well, I can tell you the areas that we're using it right now, and it's for the most part, it's any predictive analytics around who we should be focused in on. So really which customers are the ones that we can bring the most value to right now and focusing. So we do that in terms of a term that's widely used in the organization and in the industry, next best action, and focusing on these particular customers. So we've done that. And really, I've been quite impressed with the information that we've seen in terms of our ability to predict in the mid-80s in terms of who's most likely has an opportunity for a patient in their practice in the next 30 days. It's quite good. And then the value of actually making sure that we're in those clinics to help support the pull-through on it, it's demonstrated some real upside value. So that's where we've used it at this stage. I think, though, the next part of it really comes down to us understanding how we can actually adjust. We talk about customer of one, what insights that we could be providing and generating to actually tailor what we're offering particular offices and having a broader insight. We're not yet on that journey, but that to me is sort of the next chapter. And in an era where you think about omni-channel engagement and involvement with customers, how we're tailoring our messages and the value that we're focused in on to different customers using generative AI would be the other area right now. Because what we've seen is the challenge of actually having face-to-face interactions with customers and delivering value one-on-one like Jassi and I are having today is going down. And so you need to figure out virtually more and more how you can bring that value and what is going to be of real interest to that physician or nurse practitioner or others. And that's where I think AI can really help us identify that, but then also generate that.
We'll continue the conversation after this quick message from our exclusive sponsor, Axtria. Improving commercial and patient outcomes. That's our goal at Axtria. We are at the forefront of life sciences digital transformation with the most advanced cloud software and data analytics solutions, enabling companies to manage data, derive artificial intelligence-powered insights, and streamline business operations across the product lifecycle. Because of our deep expertise in the life sciences domain, we are the top choice for life sciences companies for their digital and business transformation initiatives. We work with all of the top global life sciences companies who consider us their true partners, driven primarily by our most important differentiators, our people, and our inclusive and progressive culture, which is focused on developing the life sciences leaders of tomorrow. With every project, we are helping our customers achieve commercial success. But more importantly, we are helping them improve health outcomes for patients. See what we can do for you at Axtria.com.
And Jassi, I want to go back to you on some examples. Can you talk about some examples you are seeing your customers leveraging AI in this space?
So at the last count, I think we have over 100 use cases of using AI and Gen AI. And, as Paul said, next best action is actually probably one of the most widely used case. Actually, you could use generative AI in practically every aspect of where you need to see, you need to consume a lot of content and actually see patterns. So, for example, we do a lot of data management. So one of the things that we're actually doing is that, just basically taking any data that you've never seen before, and there's so many new data sources becoming available or from different sources becoming available. How does generative AI basically just takes a look at the structure of the data and actually predicts what are the different fields and how do you link it with the current data model that you currently have. Then you get into, once you have done that, understanding the data quality of it. One of the big things is the business rules management that every business needs to basically manage all the rules. And by the way, business rules management, things like fuzzy logic and all that has been around for 50 years. Which is part of AI, So how do you actually bring all of that together? I think one of the other things that we are actually seeing is particularly in the area of looking at electronic health records, which has a lot of unstructured data in there as well, not just structured data. How do you actually link that using Gen AI with AI capability? One of the things, this is a very common thing, is that if you ask Gen AI what is 1.8 minus 0.07, it usually will give you a wrong answer because there's no way for it to validate that answer. For that, you actually need a lot of business context, the business rules, and the traditional AI and the statistical methods to basically validate these things. So what we see is this hybrid approach of the traditional analytics, the AI, which now we consider old AI, but also with the Gen AI, and actually putting it all together. No one solution is going to basically give us the complete answer, but it's linking all of that together is where we actually see a lot of value. So, the example that Paul was talking about in the next best action. Next best action is not actually only figuring out what do I want to tell the customer, which is my self-centered. Yes, I'm trying to predict what their needs are, but actually really understanding what kind of patient are they treating and what do they want to know to first, find this patient, diagnose this patient, treat this patient, drive the right outcome, and actually taking all the information from the medical literature, which is using LLMs, in a compliant way, all of that, but also looking at it from the real world data that we are seeing. So, for example, none of the physicians actually know the data on all the other patients that are there in their practice or at the healthcare system. They have no capability of doing that, by the way. How can we actually convince them that when they see a patient, we're giving them the right answer, looking at all the patients that they have in the practice? That's where you start really adding value to the doctor, that they want to engage more with you because you're enabling them to treat their patients better. And I think those are some of the examples of what we are, doing on the clinical side, along with what we call the commercial. So, when we think about how does a doctor treat a patient better, it's not just commercial, it's also clinical.
And you're right, Jassi. AI holds tremendous potential, but as you said, it's a combination of different technologies with what people are good at is what is going to drive value.
And like everything else in life, whenever we see a new shiny object, we go through the hype cycle where everyone goes up and actually starts using it. Then you suddenly realize that it's not perfect because nothing in life is perfect. Then you realize that actually you're investing 100 times more than what you budgeted for or expected because, these things are expensive and they can actually blow up very, very quickly. Because there's a new way of learning, the new way of doing this thing. So, we are going to go through that hype cycle, but eventually there is no doubt in my mind that this is here to stay and is going to change the way we all think and engage with our customers.
The examples that we talked about were more externally oriented in terms of how we do a better job identifying value that we could bring to customers, which customers represent a better match for what our value proposition is. But there's also a huge opportunity internally. If you think about our what I described in terms of our model, which was we have relatively large teams, individuals who are used to maybe having a team of 10, now have teams of 15, 20. There's crossfire. You can't spend the same amount of time. And so from a coaching support perspective, how can you use AI to actually provide more information and insights directly to the individual team members to help them work towards those outcomes that we talked about and identify those insights is something that we're now starting to explore. And going everything from a learning and development perspective to all the way up in terms of where you should be spending time and the insights there. And that in organizations takes a long time for people to buy into. There's value that can come there and kind of trust the insights. But we're at the early stages of starting to explore that. I think that's going to be very interesting for us.
Yeah, I'm really liking this conversation. You guys are feeding on and adding on to each other's point of view. Exactly what we wanted. So I'm going to turn to the future now. Paul, so what trends do you foresee shaping the future of customer engagement? And Bayer has invested now in some of the cell and gene therapy. So if you want to touch upon that, what are some of the investments you're making, especially if we talk about the customer-facing teams?
Well, I mean, I think, so if you think about the future and the evolution of what's going to happen from a customer perspective, right? Because that ultimately, there's what do we need to do? We're on our own journey right now of evolving the way that we're organized, how we operate. So that's a big change. But the other one is the evolution that's happening on the customer side of things. And in particular, I mean, this is not a new trend, but it really seems like it's going to the next level, is the depth of what we're seeing in terms of health systems. We're seeing vertical integration from payers down into healthcare providers. That's becoming larger and bigger. We're seeing more private practices being acquired by these health systems, and then the standardization and implementation of more formal ways of doing things, be it care protocols, internal formularies, things like that. So less individual autonomy. And that's really changing how we interact with customers and how we need to think about deployment. So the physicians are changing and the health systems are changing. I think on the payer and physician side, I think newer products, the access barriers from a payer perspective that's happening with newer products are going up. And therefore, the value that you demonstrate to payers early on, how you design your clinical trials, has to be very thoughtful. That's just going to get, I think, more stringent as time goes on. And therefore, for patients, access to your product, I think is becoming more challenging. And you see abandonment rates and things like that. And so support services that you can provide into them. We're doing simple things right now of making sure that people are aware of some of the changes that are happening with Medicare so that they can enroll and spread out their deductibles over the 12-month period as opposed to all upfront in that. So there's simple things that we need to do as the landscapes evolve, which is evolving all the time, but in each of those areas, make sure that we are adapting and adjusting the way that we bring value to the three key customers that exist in our industry.
Jassi, your thoughts on the future of customer engagement, how it's going to shape up?
When you look at from the pharma life sciences perspective, even medical device perspective, what you see is that the industry is becoming a lot more innovative, but also we're solving bigger, tougher problems. When you look at a cell and gene therapy, you look at rare diseases, you look at the really kind of a very small niche oncology disease. So what is happening is that actually the science is becoming more nuanced, more complex. But at the same time, the outcomes are actually getting very well defined and better. It either works or it doesn't work. And I think the patients are expecting this. The payers are expecting very clearly defined outcomes to do this. And I think that trend has been picking up and will continue in the future. Where, you look at rare disease, I think last count we now, after, we basically decoded the human genome less than 20 years ago. And now we are aware of at least, I think, 7,000 genetic diseases which are already been identified. And at this point, we have less than 5% of them that actually have a treatment. So there is so much more to come. And that pace of innovation is actually picking up. But at the same time, all aspects of the healthcare needs to transform. No one has figured out how these are going to get priced. No one has figured out who's going to pay for it and what impact it will have on the healthcare system. So a big part of the future of healthcare is that aspect of it as well. How do we price it? How do we pay for it? And how do we make it affordable? How do you give access to the people everywhere in the world? And by the way, not just in rich countries like US, but actually the developing world, which actually still has more than 5 billion people. When will they get access to these things? So I think the future of healthcare is, I would say, very, very optimistic. But there are a lot of things we have not figured out yet.
Yeah, and makes a lot of sense. I want to quickly ask you guys about what advice would you have for emerging leaders in the customer engagement space in the life sciences industry? I'll go with you, Paul, first.
I think we've kind of touched on two of them today. I think innovation and sort of embracing some of the new technologies that are emerging in terms of AI, generative AI, thinking about their applications. I think any exposure and experimentation with that, critical. The other thing is, I think what we're seeing, at least in our model, and it's true everywhere, that collaboration is just a key skill set that you're going to need to be successful in our industry or the broader healthcare industry. That actually breadth of experience, having worked in a couple of different areas and different perspectives and actually seeing problems from different parts of an organization brings tremendous value because you can bring that other insight to that collaborative environment. And so I would encourage anyone who's thinking about emerging leaders, it's that exposure on sort of the cutting edge of how people are applying AI, generative AI, and trying to get as much breadth earlier on in your career to see different aspects of our industry. And I think that foundation is invaluable.
Jassi, what advice do you have for emerging leaders?
So for the emerging leaders, it's becoming multifaceted. We have seen that the people who engage with the customers, the first level was that, being able to build that personal connection and earn their trust. Then it was about actually really understanding their problems or their business, and also whether you're a brand marketer or whether you're a sales person or whether you're a field reimbursement specialist, of really understanding the nuances and actually bringing that. Then actually came technologies. And every technology has a little bit of a learning curve. And now we're moving towards AI and Gen AI. But the constant theme of all this thing is that you can't be just a biology major and actually you're a marketing expert, or you can't be those things. You have to be all. And it's humanly impossible to be an expert in that. And this is where, again, I think the technologies really come in that actually gives this content and gives this insights and analytics and all of that on your fingertips. But if you're going to be afraid of technology, I think it's going to be hard. The other aspect is this whole consumerization of it. Look at it. Whether you look at consumer products, 5 years ago, it was unthinkable of actually someone dethroning a giant like Nike in consumer business, because they have known to really understand and anticipate the needs of their consumer. But they completely missed out on the whole aspect of what the brands like On and Hoka were able to do, where they spend $0 on marketing in traditional media. They are completely digital brands. How they engage with their customers is through word of mouth and actually deliver a superior product and sell most of it digital, either on their own e-commerce platform or some other platform. It's the same thing that is happening in the whole healthcare ecosystem with electronic health records. Everyone has access to it. Some people look at it, some people don't. All of us now have smartwatches, and these smartwatches are getting better and better that they're giving you the data. How do we link this thing? Whether people are wearing patches and all that. So you can't, it's becoming so complicated and so multidimensional. But at the end of it, it is all about actually putting it all together. And you have to be digitally savvy to be a successful person as a leader in our industry.
Awesome. That was the end of the main segment. That was my final question. But now on to some fun questions. I'm going to ask you guys some rapid fire questions you'll need to respond to quickly. So let's get started. I'll start with you, Jassi. What comes to mind when you hear the word customer?
Gratitude.
What's one area in your line of business where AI will have the most impact?
Learning.
And the last one person you believe is a leading mind in our industry and you would recommend featuring on this podcast?
Oh, there's so many of them, but I would start with Ajit Menon at J&J Innovative Sciences.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Jassi. Paul, now your turn.
Am I getting the same questions?
I'll ask you the same questions. What comes to mind when you hear the word customer?
Complexity.
What's one area in your line of business that AI will have the most impact on?
Patient access.
And the last one person you believe is a leading mind in our industry and you would recommend featuring on this podcast?
Anyone from BlinkRx.
Awesome. Paul and Jassi, those were some amazing rapid fire responses. Just loved them. Thank you for sharing your journey and insights with our audience. As I mentioned when we started, you guys have had a spectacular journey and you continue to make a lasting impact. I think it's everywhere in the industry that we're seeing the work that you're doing. It's having impact on the patients. So it's making a difference not only for your companies, but also for patients who benefit from these therapies that you bring to the market. Personally, I'm amazed, and I'm sure the audience will be amazed as well by the tremendous insight you guys have provided and your ability to foresee and plan ahead for the future. So many congratulations on all the successes and the impact you continue to provide. Thank you so much again It has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you guys.
Thank you, Jasmeet.
Thanks, Jasmeet.
Thank you. To the audience, you are the most important part of the show. Because of you, we are the top show in the life sciences industry. Thank you so much for joining us today, and tune in soon for the next episode of Leading Minds.
Thank you for listening to the Leading Minds podcast by Life Sciences Voice. Please share and hit subscribe with your favorite streaming platform. For more information, please visit our website at lifescivoice.com.